Okay, it's recording.
Hello.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning. Works better when I unmute myself there. Good morning, everybody.
Morning, everyone.
All right, I'm going to give it a couple more minutes here for people to log on, and then I'll go ahead and start the meeting at that point. All right, good morning, everybody. I guess we'll go ahead and start the February 23rd FTAC meeting. My name is Keith Nichols, for those that you don't know, and I'm a Principal Transportation Engineer here at the HRTPO. We're going to start this meeting by introducing Pavitra Parthasarathy. She replaced Mike Kimbrell as our Deputy Executive Director, so I'm going to let her introduce herself, and then she's going to read a disclaimer for our electronic meeting, and then we'll go ahead and take a roll call of attendance at that point. So go ahead, Pavitra.
Thank you, Keith. Again, as Keith mentioned, my name is Pavitra Parthasarathy, and I took over with Mike Kimbrell retiring. So being here for 2 months now. So I think I've met some of you, not all of you. Just wanted to introduce myself. I do plan to attend the FTAC meetings and hope to engage with you all as we keep moving on. So anyway, I'll go ahead and read the electronic talking points and then turn it over to Keith. So as we always do, pursuant to the declared state of emergency in the Commonwealth of Virginia in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and to protect the public health, safety of the Freight Transportation Advisory Committee members, staff, and the general public, today's meeting is being held electronically. This electronic meeting is required to complete essential business on behalf of the region. Per the requirements of the Code of Virginia, the agenda and all supporting documentation were posted on the HRTPO website for public review, and electronic copies of this information were provided to FTAC members and other interested parties. Today's meeting is being live streamed and recorded. The live stream is available for viewing on the Regional Connection YouTube channel, and the recording will be available via the HRTPO website. The general public were provided an opportunity to comment on today's agenda in advance of the meeting via two options. Option 1, members of the public were invited to email comments to the FTAC, and option 2, members of the public were invited to call into a dedicated phone line where comments could be recorded for the FTAC. No comments were received via either option as of 48 hours before the meeting. So before we begin today's meeting, a few of the housekeeping rules, I think all of us know them by now. So please keep your phone, your computers muted except when you're providing input. And if you do provide input, please identify your name, your locality, or the agency that you represent. And do the same if you're providing a motion or a second. And all votes today will be taken by roll call vote and will be recorded in the minutes. And again, we thank you again for your cooperation and patience. And I'll turn it over to Keith for attendance by roll call.
Thank you, Pavitra. I hope everybody can see the attendance sheet here. So I'll just go ahead and start at the top and work our way down through the bottom here. Mike Abbott.
Present.
Thank you, Mike. Marcia Capelli. Okay, Larry Ewan? Rick Morris? Thought I saw you on there, Rick. How about
Yes.
you?
Can you hear me?
I can now, Rick. Thank you.
Okay.
David White?
Present.
Thank you, David. Bob Evely?
Here.
Thank you. Cannon Moss?
Here.
Thank you, Cannon. Moving to interested parties, Carl Jackson?
Present.
Thank you. Jeremy Latimer? Ivan Rucker?
Hey Keith, how you doing? Ivan's here.
Doing great, Ivan. Thank you. Moving on to VPA staff, Barbara Nelson?
Good morning, present.
Thank you. Karen McPherson?
Yep, I'm here.
Great, thanks, Karen. And then to TPO staff, Pavitra is here. Dale Stith?
Present.
Thank you. I'm here, and Sam Belford.
Good morning, everyone.
Did I miss anybody who's in attendance for this meeting? Okay, hearing none. You may notice that we do not have a chair for this meeting. Larry Ewan is in a much better place from what I hear down sailing the Florida Keys. So we're going to need a temporary chair for this meeting. Fortunately, David White was volunteered for the role and seemed to be receptive to it. So if the FTAC is so inclined to have David chair this meeting, we'll take a vote and make it official. Do you have any comments, David, before we go ahead and take a vote on that?
No. Just be careful what you ask for.
Thank you. So we need to move and have a motion and a second to have David White as our chair. So Mike or Rick, do you want to make a motion to that effect?
Yes, motion to have David as the acting chair.
Great, thank you. And a second?
Second.
Great, thank you. We'll go ahead and move ahead with the vote then for the chair. So Mike Abbott,
Aye.
Rick Morris,
Aye.
and David White.
Aye.
Thank you, David. All right, so David, you are the chair. You can go ahead and start at the top of the agenda then. Thank you for volunteering to chair this meeting.
Yeah, certainly. And let me just pull it back up. So, yeah, I had teased that my first order of action might be to seek approval to amendment of the agenda to allow for 45 minutes of opening comments from the chair. Anticipating that may not be well received, and I won't offer such an amendment. And Pavitra, I'm sorry, very good to meet you virtually. Look forward to working with you. Into the order of business, I guess the first order or the next order of business now would be approval of the December 18, 2019 minutes. So presuming that those have, everybody has had an adequate opportunity to review those, I will ask if we have a motion to approve the minutes as submitted.
Yes,
Motion.
motion to approve.
Do we have a second, Rick? Rick, did I hear a second? I think I did.
Well, we probably both spoke at the same time. Yes, I'll second.
Yeah.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay. And we'll call for a vote.
Wait, generally for the minutes, we don't need to do a formal vote. We just ask if there's anybody who doesn't approve of the minutes. Since there's only 3 voting members today, it should be pretty easy.
Okay, very good. We'll consider the minutes approved for the record. FTAC membership, obviously something we need to discuss. And looks like Barbara Nelson is prepared to lead a discussion on that subject. Barbara, please.
Yes, good morning. And we are It's 2020, as we all know, has been a very interesting year. When we ended 2019, we were really on a roll, had reviewed the draft bylaws. We were talking about how we were going to backfill vacancies to make the FTAC more robust and engaged in the planning processes, as 2018 and 2019 had been very, very busy with FTAC engagement and participation in the long-range transportation plan. And then, as we all know, COVID happened. And so some things were delayed in a manner that we had not anticipated from a timing perspective. And in the summer of 2020, during a Port of Virginia combined motor carrier and stakeholder meeting, I was providing a brief update on some of the efforts that were underway by the port. And one of the items I spoke about was the FTAC and our engagement with the HRTPO and the importance of participating in the TPO planning process so that we could make sure that freight had a voice in the transportation planning process. It was fantastic because David White said, he provided a unsolicited, hey, if anybody on this call is interested, please reach out and talk to Barbara. We need members, and it would be great. And so one of the in that very meeting, Bob Evely, who's on our call today, he messaged me. We had a chance to have some back and forth conversation. And I provided Bob with a great deal of background resource information, from the draft bylaws to meeting agendas to information on the LRTP prioritization process. And he was very interested in becoming a member of the FTAC. Bob's role and relationship in freight in the region is extensive, working in partnership with the Tidewater Motor Trucking Association, the BMA, with the Ports Stakeholder Committee, and really having a leadership role in a committee called the Peer Committee, which really worked to make sure that the technology investments and advancements that we were trying to deploy and implement to improve gate turn times and freight fluidity, that they worked. We had a number of issues that needed to be addressed, and Bob's collaborative leadership style really helped move those through the proper channels. And so Bob is one of the new folks that we are recommending be added as a member. Cannon Moss, who's also with us today, is another member that we would like to recommend. The value of the short line rail is just so important to the Port of Virginia in terms of moving goods in and out of the port. And the Norfolk Portsmouth Beltline short line is a critical partner. Cannon, his background, in addition to being with NPBL, I believe he came to them from Norfolk Southern, and is also the president of the Virginia Railway Association, which has both representation from the Class 1s as well as the short lines across Virginia. So I think both Bob and Cannon will give us a depth of perspective that I think will be a real benefit to the FTAC as we move forward, and as we work to increase our membership over time. And maybe what I can do is open the floor now for Bob and Cannon to either correct anything that I've misspoken about them, or add any comments that they would like.
I'll go first if that's all right. Thank you, Barbara, for that. That was a very good introduction. I very much appreciate your kind comments. I will confirm that Barbara did send me an extensive amount of material, and I did go through the extensive amount of material and asked just a couple of questions. which were answered very well. And I'm looking forward to having a role and a voice in the group and helping to continue to move things forward. Thank you.
Yeah, again, thank you very much for the introduction. Pretty much summed it all up. So I'm a railroad guy, and that's been my background for the last 20 years. And so I think that the freight moving in and out of Hampton Roads is pretty important for all of us, especially the ones that live here. So I appreciate the opportunity to be part of this group and look forward to it.
Is there, I would entertain a motion to accept the nominations, I guess, of Bob and Cannon as members to the FTAC.
Motion to accept both members.
Second that motion.
Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote. Mike?
Aye.
Rick?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. And let me just offer my words of welcome and thanks to you both. You know, I think if you look at where we stand right now with the makeup, you know, we have Rick that really brings that BCO interest perspective to the discussion, obviously vitally important. Mike brings that steamship line and perspective and has familiarity with terminal operations. And then, you know, obviously missing until just a moment ago was somebody to bring the rail perspective. Cannon, really glad to have you as part of the group, and Bob, then, you know, with your expertise and your stature in the trucking community, I think it really is important that you're a part of this group as well. So I was really pleased when I saw both of your names and that you both expressed interest and a willingness to serve. And it's, you know, it's important we have the opportunity here to play a significant role in the freight and the broader transportation system of the region and the Commonwealth. So, you know, this is good work. It can bury you at times. There's lots of information to consider, but it's important work. So thank you for being willing to do it, and look forward to working with you.
And I just want to let everybody know, this will become official once the HRTPO board approves the membership change at their next meeting. There's a special meeting for the end of March. I'm not sure if there'll be any other items on that, you know, where we can approve this. It'll definitely take effect by the third Thursday in April if we can't include it on the March agenda. Thank you.
If I can add, I think the March meeting is literally one topic, and that will be the LRTP. So it will be at the April meeting, if I can add.
Okay, so it will become official as of the third Thursday in April then.
All right, very good. Then we look forward to Cannon and Bob having your advice during this meeting. Does anybody have a list of FTAC members that are not present other than Larry?
Marcia is the only other one right now. The other members have either retired or moved in recent months and years. So we have five. We have officially 5 members as of this point, which will become 7 once Bob and Cannon are approved.
Okay, so, you know, before moving on, then, you know, just and not that we need to spend time on it right now, but because we have a full agenda. You know, but let's be giving some thought to others that would really add to the strength of the FTAC. I think as we move down further, you'll see when we get into the bylaws, you'll see identification of sectors of the industry and others that are suitable in terms of their representation to the FTAC. So let's give some thought to that, and you know, feel free to share your any recommendations with staff. And so, all right, moving on then. Where am I next? 2045 Long Range Transportation Plan.
All right, good morning, everyone. Well, I've got
Yes, Dale, thank you.
Sure. As part of your agenda package, oops, hold on. I actually think I have to hit share screen first. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. So as part of your agenda package, you received our draft fiscally constrained list of projects, a resolution that we're putting before FTAC today to consider endorsing this fiscally constrained list of projects, and also a copy of the slide deck that I'm presenting today. So I'm very excited to be able to present this list of projects to you. For the new members in the room, our long-range transportation plan is the blueprint for the region's transportation future, and it identifies all regionally significant transportation projects for Hampton Roads. These LRTPs have a planning horizon of at least 20 years, and they're updated every 5 years to reflect changing conditions such as assumptions for population and employment growth or changing economic conditions. One key thing about these LRTPs is they must be fiscally constrained, and that we have to demonstrate how the projects identified in the plan can be funded. And essentially, with our long-range transportation plans, if a project needs to get built and it's going to have federal or state money, it needs to be in the long-range transportation plan. So this timeline shows we've been working on updating our long-range transportation plan to that horizon year of 2045 for really the past 5 years. And everything that we've done up until this point has been to get to this draft list of projects. This fiscally constrained list really is the heart and soul of the long-range transportation plan. And FTAC has been involved throughout this process, identifying vision and goals, collecting candidate projects. When we updated our project prioritization tool, FTAC had an opportunity to review those updates and provide comments. They were briefed on our scenario planning framework. And then more recently, we also sent out our draft project prioritization scores to this committee and received great feedback from FTAC members regarding our project prioritization scores. So in terms of fiscal constraint, again, fiscal constraint is the demonstration that there is sufficient funding to implement the proposed transportation improvements identified in the plan. And essentially what we do in the plan is we identify those funds that are reasonably available to fund transportation projects through that horizon year. And for us, it's 2045. All of the project costs in the plan are expressed in year of expenditure, and this is so that we can account for inflation. That graphic on the right of this slide shows what some of these funding sources are that we can use to constrain projects. Some of these funding sources include our regional funding sources, the Hampton Roads Transportation Fund. We've got some smart scale funding sources and also some federal programs like the Regional Surface Transportation Program and Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Funding Program. And then those project prioritization scores that FTAC reviewed for us a few months ago, we use those scores as the guide to constrain projects. So the short of it is our revenue forecast has to be greater than or equal to project costs identified in the plan. So our project prioritization tool, again, for the new members, this is a very technical data-driven tool, and it evaluates projects in terms of project utility, economic vitality, and project viability. And for each candidate project that we evaluate, there is a score associated with it. And so we use these scores with that revenue forecast to identify those top projects. In terms of our revenue forecast, the two main sources that we received our constrained revenue forecast from are VDOT and HRTPO. VDOT provides the revenue forecast in terms of federal and state revenues that we can anticipate over our 20-year horizon. And the forecast that they did provide us has been modified to analyze impacts from the COVID-19 pandemic. And then HRTAC takes the information that VDOT provides us and then factors in additional assumptions for debt proceeds, some toll revenue, debt service, and financing expenses. So when we put together the revenue forecast from VDOT and HRTAC, Hampton Roads between the years of 2021 and 2045 can anticipate about $28.5 billion for transportation investments. Now, one of the things we have to do first and foremost is reserve funds to preserve the existing transportation system and identify that there's maintenance needs that we have to take care of. That really represents about 60% of this estimate that we can't touch. We set it aside for maintenance, but it still leaves us about $11.5 billion for additional capacity improvement projects. I've broken up on this graphic on the right that $11.5 billion by various funding sources. Some of these funding sources have very specific criteria, can only be used on certain types of projects. For instance, the majority, HRTAC, which is about $6.8 billion available, can only be used on highway projects that provide the most congestion relief for the most number of citizens. So we worked very closely during the month of January, worked very closely with technical stakeholders and held 3 virtual, really marathon meetings back to back to back to apply these prioritization scores and fiscal constraint guidelines and the revenue forecast to come up with this fiscally constrained list of projects, which again is part of your agenda package. This list of projects identifies 131 multimodal projects for construction and an additional 6 projects as regional studies. As part of this list in your handout, we've identified these fiscally constrained projects. If they were a project submitted by FTAC as a candidate project, that is highlighted in red. And then we also highlighted other intermodal freight projects in a light blue. So I won't go over all the projects on the list, but I did want to highlight a few on these slides. On the draft fiscally constrained list, we do have quite a few projects on freight corridors. Just to name a few, we do have the I-64 widening Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, the I-64 South Side widening, which includes the high-rise bridge. We've got improvements on 64 in the peninsula, and the 64-264 interchange. Those 4 projects are actually under construction right now. In addition to these, for the 2045, we're recommending more interstate projects. This would include an additional phase of the 64-264 interchange, improvements along the 264, 64-464 interchange, the Denby Boulevard interchange on 64, the VA 164 Western Freeway widening. There's also improvements on the draft list for the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, the Thimble Shoals Parallel Tunnel, Skips Creek Connector, and the US 58 258 interchange. In terms of intermodal freight projects, we have some railroad overpasses, Freeman Avenue, Portlock Road, Parkland, also Hampton Boulevard Terminal, and then the Craney Island Access Road. We have a study to look at building some infrastructure to provide access to the future Craney Island Terminal. So we've got a few maps to show some of these projects.
Hey, Dale, can you go back to that slide, please?
Sure.
The Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, Thimble Shoals. Doesn't the tunnel authority pay for all of the improvements to the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel?
Yes, great point. They have a blend of funding sources, but the majority is the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel Authority. But because this project is still regionally significant, even though the funds come outside of that forecast that's provided by VDOT and HRTAC, we still need to reflect this project in our plan.
So that's interesting to me because there is other transportation infrastructure in the region that is that is not public. The railroads specifically. So, and maybe Cannon, you have some perspective on this, but how would rail and improvements to those private assets be reflected in a regional transportation plan?
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't know if you wanted me to talk. I mean,
yeah.
the rail, and it's not these aren't rail specific improvements, right? Like, they're to benefit their surrounding communities. These are all overpasses. Freeman Avenue happens to be a project that we're involved in with the City of Chesapeake, and we got a Chrissy grant for it. And Port Lock they're all like they're not to improve. Well, they will improve, but they're not specifically designed to improve rail velocity. It's really more to help the areas. Portlock Yard over in Norfolk, at Norfolk Southern's yard, gets blocked all the time, so an overpass would significantly help them. Hampton Boulevard, I'm sure you're painfully aware where the rail crosses Turnpike Boulevard. That's a disaster. The folks in Suffolk getting delayed a lot by the Commonwealth Railroad. So I think they're more public. At least that's my first time really seeing this. So I'm just throwing that out there. It seems like it's more of a public benefit than like the railroads get rail preservation grant from the DRPT, and that's not in here. And that helps freight move forward. But I don't know. That's my humble opinion. That helps, David.
Yeah, Ken, so I agree with you with those ones that are listed on the right-hand side, that those are, not pure rail projects, but if there were areas of the freight rail in the region that were a priority for one of the rails to improve, is that something that should somehow be incorporated into this public transportation plan?
Absolutely. Our long-range transportation plan is a surface transportation plan that is multimodal, and we certainly want to reflect projects that help freight movement. The issue would be to make sure that it is constrained to put it in this plan. But if there are some projects where we have rail components as a part of that highway project, or we could have a standalone rail project. If we can identify money as a region, whether it's public, private, or a combination, and we can show that the estimated cost, that there are reasonably available funds to constrain that, we can absolutely reflect those rail projects in this plan. So if we do know that there are some regional rail improvements with logical termini that has identified funding that would be built before 2045, that's the sort of feedback that we would want if we're not already aware of it, and we'd want to reflect that in our long-range transportation plan.
Well, this is Pavitra. Do you want to touch upon, sometimes it's the group projects, like not every project needs to be listed. So it's not a freight related, but it's signal, chain, when you update your signals, we don't need to list every signal project, but it's captured under the group projects. Another way we've talked about is also sometimes some projects can be highlighted as being in the region, need not be in the list of projects. It's more, this also has implications for conformity and the other. That's why the fiscal constraint, we are listing projects. In some cases, we don't need to list every single project. They can be group projects. There are different ways we can get at it, but I'll let Dale answer it, but I just thought I'd chime in on that. So.
No, thank you, Pavitra. It's a great point. We do have a grouped project set aside, as Pavitra just mentioned, where smaller scoped projects, we don't have to list all those small projects, which could be safety improvements, signal timing. It could be smaller rail improvements too that are still consistent with our long-range transportation plan. It would be like major if this isn't exactly the same thing, but if we had high-speed rail and we had enough funding for high-speed rail, that is something that we would want to individually list and highlight in the long-range transportation plan. So, you know, same thing with the roadways. We reflect widenings, but we don't necessarily reflect all the little things that might occur along a corridor in terms of signal timing or safety. But definitely it's an opportunity to promote things that are important to this region and things that are important to freight. So great questions. Were there any more before I moved on to the maps? So just wanted to show a few maps to see how these projects look on our region. This particular map shows our committed regional priority highway projects that are already under construction. This includes the improvements on 64 on the peninsula. We also have the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel improvements, the 264 interchange phase 2, and then the 64 South Side high-rise bridge. In addition to these improvements, what we also have committed are improvements to our express lanes. This would be our HOT network, high occupancy toll network, that goes from Jefferson Avenue on the peninsula, includes these projects that I just mentioned and circles down to Bowers Hill. In terms of proposed interstate projects as part of the 2045, also including the Denby Boulevard interchange on the peninsula, another phase of the 264 interchange, improvements on 264 to Independence, including the Independence Boulevard interchange. Then we have the 464 interchange, the VA 168 bypass improvement, the Bowers Hill interchange all the way up to College Drive, and then the VA 164 widening. We also have a lot more non-interstate projects that are a part of the plan. Just to highlight a couple, we've got Route 17 in Gloucester, improvements on 58. We've got the Craney Island Access Road study that I mentioned. We still have the Regional Connector study that's looking at improving connectivity across the harbor. Route 17, there's also some improvements. Again, all these projects are listed in your agenda. And then this is just a map that shows the multimodalness of the plan, where in addition to the highway projects, we also have some transit improvements and some bicycle and pedestrian improvements as a part of our plan. So in terms of fiscal constraint, again, when we factor in all of our revenue forecast assumptions, including what some localities have said that they can fund regionally significant projects. For example, the city of Virginia Beach historically identifies about $1 billion for each of our long-range transportation plans to fund regionally significant projects that are within the city of Virginia Beach. When we add all these up together, we have about $29.5 billion. Again, $17 billion is reserved right off the top for maintenance and preserving our transportation network. So that leaves us with $12.5 billion to have additional capacity in our transportation network. When we add up the costs of all the projects that we're recommending on that draft fiscal constraint list, that also comes to $12.5 billion. So we're able to demonstrate that our revenues are just slightly greater than our project costs. So we're demonstrating fiscal constraint. So in terms of outreach, again, this is really this list of projects represents the long-range transportation plan. So we do a lot of coordination. We've already reached out to our Transportation Technical Advisory Committee. We also would love feedback from this committee. We're going to be reaching out to our Community Advisory Committee. We've already presented the draft list to the board, and we've initiated a 30-day public review as well. We've got various resources to help with this review. We've developed a project information guide that has a one-page summary for each of the projects that we're recommending. We can forward that to this committee after this meeting, and we also have an online interactive map. So the recommended action today is to endorse an FTAC resolution supporting the inclusion of the draft fiscally constrained list of projects in the 2045 long-range transportation plan. And just as some backstory, for the 2040, our current long-range transportation plan, FTAC did the same thing. They had a resolution of support for these list of projects. We're also, even if whether the resolution is approved or not today by FTAC, we welcome any comments and feedback from the committee up until March 2nd. Before I open up the resolution, just looking ahead, we're going to go to the board at the end of March to approve the fiscally constrained list of projects after we've incorporated all the feedback we've received from the public and the various advisory committees. And then we want to adopt the 2045 long-range transportation plan in the summer of this year, aiming for June of 2021. So I'll pull up the resolution quick. Hopefully everyone can see the resolution. And I don't know, for the sake of time, if you actually want me to read this resolution or just sort of give a summary of what's on here. And again, it is part of your agenda package.
For the sake of order, why don't you go ahead and read the whole thing, Dale?
Sure. So this is a resolution of the HRTPO Freight Transportation Advisory Committee supporting the 2045 Long-Range Transportation Plan draft fiscally constrained list of projects. Whereas, as an advisory committee to the HRTPO board, the HRTPO Freight Transportation Advisory Committee advises the HRTPO board on regional freight transportation requirements, conducts outreach activities that help HRTPO efforts to help raise awareness of the importance of freight transportation to the region, and collects region-wide input on these matters. Whereas the development of the 2045 LRTP is in the final stages of its multi-year transportation planning process. Whereas the HRTPO board has approved the prioritization scores of LRTP candidate projects at its January 21st, 2021 meeting. Whereas the HRTPO, in coordination with regional stakeholders, has developed the draft fiscally constrained list of projects for the 2045 LRTP using prioritization scores and forecasted transportation funds. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the HRTPO Freight Transportation Advisory Committee supports the 2045 LRTP draft fiscally constrained list of projects. Be it further resolved that the HRTPO Freight Transportation Advisory Committee respectfully requests that the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Organization publicize this resolution on its website and transmit a copy of this resolution to the HRTPO board.
Thank you, Dale. Is there a motion to pass the resolution as read?
Motion to approve as read.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. Mike?
Give me just a moment to pull the voting sheet back up.
Okay, Mike?
Aye.
Rick?
Aye.
And from Mr. White, you have an aye.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Was there any follow-up discussion that any comments that anybody wanted to offer on that action or that subject?
Real quick, I don't have a comment on it. I just had a real, I guess, dumb question. Is there anywhere on the web where you can actually specifically go and look at all these projects? Like, I know you didn't mention there was like an interactive map, but if you wanted to do more research on one of them, is there a way to nail that down anywhere out there in the intranet?
Yes, we'll send links. I can put them in the chat, and then we'll also follow up with an email. On our website, we'll have the one-page summaries on each of the 137 projects, and then the interactive map, and then some of the on the summaries you'll see links to other projects if they have project websites.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Sure.
Dale, thanks for that. That was a lot of information and really a complex matter really concisely and well presented. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may add, Dale, if you want to also in the chat, just provide a link to the overall LRTP where the other reports are for people who have not been involved in the process. That would be helpful as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we're moving on to item number 7, the Statewide Freight Advisory Committee. Something that I know that Barbara is excited to talk about. So it's all yours.
Thank you. Yes, we are very excited about it, and again, the regional FTAC in Hampton Roads has served as a great example. The value that a statewide freight advisory could provide to the council. And Secretary Valentine, our Secretary of Transportation, this is an initiative that freight partners in a forum impacted and how there can be increase for in a can create economic opportunity. Kathy McGee heads up the Office of Innovation. Yes, again, another effort by COVID, but we do expect that in the next to participate in the today. He has also been very involved with itself, bringing in other federal resource partners into the conversation to provide examples of best practices, notable practices have been undertaken by statewide freight advisory committees. The goal with establishing this body is to make sure that the interests of freight aspects process from to instruction, value, form investment to make sure that they're spending patience and for that's that is very meaningful. Virginia, the individual targeting first. Center. essential research resource for the group. We hope to have more meetings and expected to be what will declare the first annual freight forum. Every year, and every year bringing interests of freight and to get over weeks. That date is not yet set. We expect that Secretary within the next 30 days, and so we would expect that the meeting would be several weeks following the invitation. And the first meeting will be virtual. We have future meetings in person, but it's in the past, Virginia would convene a conversation with freight partners that would occur concurrent with the development of the statewide transportation plan, which in Virginia we call VTrans. This changes that. It makes something just happen once every 4 years. It's something that's continuous, it's consistent, it's ongoing, and that there will be many opportunities to provide input. This body does not have authority to enact regulations or policies, rather to recommend, but the role would be to recommend at a very high level directly to the Secretary and the Commonwealth Transportation Board. It will be supported by a technical resource team, including all of the reports under the Secretary of Transportation, as well as Secretary of Commerce and Secretary of Public Safety, because freight-related transportation issues fall also within the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, which is under the Secretary of Commerce, as well as the State Police, which is under Public Safety. So it will be a cross-secretariat effort, but will be led by Secretary Valentine and succeeding secretaries. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer, and we're very excited to be moving this forward and to be able to highlight the good work of the Hampton Roads TPO in representing the value of a continuous FTAC.
Thank you. Any questions for Barbara? Hearing none, I'll just offer some, maybe a little bit of perspective. Yeah, I find myself feeling older these days because I more frequently am using the phrase, for those of you that have been around a while. And so that indicates that perhaps maybe I have in some fashion. You don't have to go back all that long before freight wasn't really represented didn't have a voice in the HRTPO process, in the regional transportation planning. And, you know, I can remember we even at the VMA, we changed our board meeting dates so that either, you know, Art Moy or myself could start attending the HRTPO meetings because they were on the same day as our board meeting. And you started having some conversations with Jeff Florin, who was at the Port Authority, and, you know, since retired. And, you know, he was very effective and joined with us in really pointing out that freight needed to be represented in the transportation planning of the region. And we were very pleased with how receptive the DPO was to that. And out of that came the Freight Transportation Advisory Committee, the first in the state, the first TPO in the state to have freight represented as part of the planning process. And so really glad to see that now that that is being taken to the state level. And Barbara, really appreciate your efforts there to work with the secretary to make this happen. It's very positive from my perspective that that freight will have an official voice in the statewide transportation planning. Okay, agenda item number 8, the Hampton Roads Regional Freight Facilities Inventory. And Sam, we're gonna hear from you on that.
Yeah, hi everyone. Can everyone see my slides okay?
Yes, thanks.
All right. So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm just gonna briefly talk with you about a task that our staff has been working on. It's kind of related to what we've been talking about before in taking what mapping inventory and data that we have in-house or that we have access to, such as, databases from Federal Highway or VDOT or the port. How do we take that and create an interactive map, something that is user-friendly and the public can use, as well as organizations and working groups and committees such as this one. This idea kind of came about, you had mentioned Jeff Florin. It was actually, he had approached us with this idea several years ago and wanted to take the existing things that we've created in studies and showcase that in an interactive map format. Just a little bit of background about our region. You know that our region is one of the freight transportation gateways for the East Coast. I don't need to harp on that, but we have many different assets as a part of this region, and in addition to that, we've done a number of studies that has done a number of different analyses on top of that to look at where freight bottlenecks are, where congestion is occurring. And so this idea was how do we take that data and put it into an interactive format. The purpose behind it, like I talked about, is to create a detailed mapping inventory of these freight facilities and data that we have in Hampton Roads, and to put it into an interactive format for both exploring and tracking these freight network as we move to the future. This is a comprehensive list of what we have assembled to date. In terms of roadways, we've got congestion levels, truck volumes and truck percentages, truck bottlenecks are included. We also have where regional gateways are located, drawbridges, toll facilities, bridge locations that have weight restrictions. We have also located bridges where vertical clearance restrictions are located. And we've assembled all these into a GIS platform. This is the first step in doing this. We also have denoted where some truck parking locations are, the national highway system, and as well as intermodal connectors. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the national highway system, but it's essentially the roadways that are important to our nation's economy, defense, and mobility. That was created back in 1995 with President Clinton. It was the NHS Designation Act of 1995 that formed this. But these types of roadways, as well as intermodal connectors that are important to our country, we have denoted these into our regional network. As a part of this, we also have a number of different railroad, highway rail crossing locations, as well as railroad drawbridges. We have a number of different military specific type of facilities, the StrawNet, which is the minimum defense highway network and necessary to deploy both our military personnel and goods throughout the country, but we've noted where those roadways are within the Hampton Roads region specifically. Roadways serving the military, that is something that the TPO staff has developed over the years. We have a number of different installations that are not located on StrawNet that we wanted to capture as a part of that. So we have included those roadways that are connecting those facilities as well. The military and supporting sites for both StrawNet as well as non-StrawNet, power projection platform routes, as well as power projection platform installations and PPP seaports of embarkation. Power projection platform routes are a subset of the strategic highway network that are the most critical to support the movement of DoD equipment. Within the Hampton Roads region, the PPP installation that has been designated is JBLE Fort Eustis. And then also the military has an agreement with the Port of Virginia as a seaport to offer two terminals of theirs to the military in the case of a national emergency. Furthermore, we've documented within our GIS platform a number of different port facilities, marine highways, barge services that are in operation, airports that are in our region, as well as warehouse and distribution centers, manufacturing facilities, and where our top freight employers are located. So just to give you a quick little demo of another region that has already done this. This is actually the region that Jeff Lauren got his idea from. Let's see if I can pull that up. Can everyone see the Philly Freight Finder? Let's see, let me turn off these layers. So this is an interactive platform of the Philadelphia area, and they have a number of these freight facilities and assets that we've been talking about that we've been able to assemble. And the nice thing about this is that you can zoom in onto any facility and you can click on different roadways and you can see what the capacity is, what the average daily traffic is. You can look at parking locations, how many truck spaces are available. And so this is kind of the idea that we had for our region, is to create something like this for Hampton Roads that showcases this, and we're able to update on an ongoing basis. And so you can see the different layers that on how interactive this is. And so so where we are is we have compiled that list that I had shown you on the previous slide. We've put them all into ArcMap GIS, and we are now in the process of working with our staff. We have some some HRPDC staff that has done some of this type of interactive maps, converting it from GIS to an interactive platform. And so we're in the process of doing that right now. What we'd like for you to do is take a look at the proposed list of facilities and map layers that we've already assembled to date. And if you have any additional freight data or facilities that you feel that we may not have captured or incorporated, just to let us know in a couple of weeks by March 9th, and we will try to get those incorporated going forward. This is going to be a living platform that we hope to maintain moving forward as we do regional freight studies or other types of studies. We hope that it's a useful tool. That's all I have today. Did anyone have any questions on that?
Hey Sam, it's Karen. I'm just curious, do you have the list of the top employers that you could share with us? Just to kind of refresh our memory. I know it's evolved over time, so if we could just have a look at that, that would be great. But overall, this is just fantastic. I mean, I'm a visual thinker, so just to have everything in the same place, I think is fantastic. So appreciate your efforts.
All right, yeah, we can certainly do that. We took I think, yeah, Karen and her group working with the port previously had looked at the top freight employers, and we went back to that original source and updated that. So yeah, we can definitely share what we have to date.
Hey, Sam and everyone, I have shared with the group working on the statewide VTrans, the freight element of the work that you all were doing down here in Hampton Roads as a potential model for what could be built out across the state. And so Chris Wishman will likely be reaching out to you for more input.
Great, that sounds awesome. Thanks for doing that, Barb.
I'm not sure how enthusiastic with a thanks that was, but sounds like it might mean more work. But I think it's potentially a excellent tool. Not only from a planning perspective, but from a telling the story of freight perspective. So kudos to you. We've done something similar, but on a far less sophisticated. In a far less sophisticated way, particularly with the marine terminals. So question, and it sparks a question for me, are you going to be including the types of freight that would be handled out of different facilities?
What did you have something specific in mind? Like,
well, as I think about the marine terminals, specifically, obviously we know that the Port Authority's facilities handle predominantly containers, but the private marine terminals along the branches handle a variety of bulk products. And then of course some of them are they go to market, and some of those are are strictly for the use of that company, and so they're not really offering their facilities services to the market, but they fulfill a transportation need for their own product.
yeah, we're certainly open to including that type of data if we're able to access that. And are you talking about more specific commodities? Because I know that when we've done our regional freight studies, we've done analysis of the different commodities that are moving throughout the Hampton Roads region.
By example, we have facilities that handle petroleum product. We have facilities that handle fertilizer. We have facilities that handle grains. So, that's the nature of my question is, are you going to try to identify what types of cargoes different facilities handle?
That wasn't a part of the original scope, but I mean, it's definitely a platform that we can expand and move in that area if we'd like to do that.
Okay, well, as we review it, I'm sure we'll probably have some comments and possibly some suggestions for you.
Sounds great.
And I just want to edit, as Sam said, this will be a living website. So at any point we can update it based on any recommendations of the FTAC or from anybody. So it's definitely not like a printed report or anything like that.
I'd like to add one other thing. As you all are taking this in and this tool as a resource for people to share, one of the things that again has been a challenge over time, and again, this is a great first step, but something for all you users, again, in different aspects of freight, is how can we take this data and continue to populate it with an eye on economic growth? Because again, we do this and we share bottlenecks based on delay, but again, we've all been we get to a point and we're challenged with how do you translate delay into economic opportunity or loss of economic opportunity. So we don't have to solve it right now, but as you're looking for friends to bring on board and we're populating this to the next level, I would ask you all, how can we get that data embedded in here to share the freight story? Because one truck is not the same as 2.5 passenger cars when we look for opportunity. So if we could all kind of leave that in there again, as we build on this great first step, how can we get that information in here as well?
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I mean, just having the tool itself that shows all of the comprehensive freight facilities that we have in the region could be a good selling point for potential companies to see that we do have a lot of extensive transportation network and facilities already in place.
If I may add, the one thing, when I was working in Seattle, that's where I moved from. The one thing we were looking into a tool like this as such when leaving. One of the things we also were thinking about, and I'm not saying this needs to be done now, is how do we simplify freight? I think what we did a presentation to our board, and normally freight, everyone thinks of these big trucks and railroad rides, but then we said, no, it's your morning coffee. It's your bagel that you eat. It's your, it's your groceries you pick up, and it really resonated, and it doesn't have to be something we have to do now, but just that message continuing to say, well, delay for trucks is different than the 2.5 passenger cars, but it's also, it's broader than that, because maybe your coffee is delayed and I like my coffee. So it's those kind of connections to your daily life that really resonated with our board members. So that is something we could and I haven't had a chance to talk with Keith and Sam on this, but just listening to your comment, that might be a good future thought to this. So.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Pavitra. When you have these tools, making the way for data to resonate with people at a personal level is sometimes the tricky but the most effective thing to do. Okay, agenda item number 9, FTAC bylaws. This will be fun. All right, Keith.
Sorry, I'm laughing over here. Yeah, we'll wrap up today's meeting with everybody's favorite topic, which is the FTAC bylaws again. As I've introduced this topic here at the last couple meetings, the FTAC was formed back in 2009, and we currently have the same bylaws that were established with the original FTAC back then. So clearly, a lot of things have happened over the last 12 years. Heck, a lot of things have happened over the last 1 year, if you think about it. But so we saw the need that we needed to revisit the bylaws and update it for the current FTAC. So we've brought this before this group at our last 2 meetings, which were in September of 2019 and December of 2019. And we've gone through these and incorporated changes as we had our discussions. But I wanted to come back at this meeting one more time, go through some of the changes we've made. There were a couple things that we had still had to have a conversation on, and then hopefully come back at our next meeting and approve the updated set of bylaws. So,
hey Keith.
With that, yeah.
So I know that I have made a couple of notes already, but with that in mind, I'm thinking perhaps the most effective thing might be for us to allow you to go all the way through, make any notes that somebody may have, questions they may want to raise, and then we'll bring them up during discussion at the end.
Yeah, sure. That's fine. There were, like, going through there, really, I think about 3 things that were still kind of up in the air. So I'm guessing it's probably related to that. So these other parts I'll go through pretty quick, but as I'm going through the more contentious parts, I'll highlight it. And if you want to have the discussion at the end, that's perfectly fine by me. So starting at the beginning, there were some proposed changes. It was just basically to make it more standard with some of our other committees. Nothing too significant in terms of the changes to the first page. Like I said, just small little changes in the text. And Articles 1 and Article 2, just the name of the committee and what its mission was. There were no proposed changes for either of those articles. One of the first sections that had some changes was Article 3, which is the purpose of the committee. We had discussions primarily at the September FTAC meeting, talking about some of the purpose we had here was a little bit too narrow. And then I believe Barb mentioned that it would make more sense to split it into two articles, one talking more about the advocacy purpose of the FTAC, and then another one related to technical assistance. So this was the proposed section 3.2. When we discussed this at the December 2019 meeting, it seems like the committee was pretty satisfied with the changes that were made to this particular article. The bigger deal was coming up here in Article 4, which is the membership and composition of the committee. This was one of the two items, I'd say, where we had the most discussion and still have quite a bit of concern moving forward that probably needs to be discussed today. First of all is the composition. Our current bylaws say 9 voting members that are appointed for 5 years, and the following groups should be considered when selecting FTAC members. And you can see they're primarily directly related to freight movement. Based on conversation primarily that we had at the December meeting, there was kind of a back and forth in terms of how many members is the right number for FTAC. There was some thought maybe 7 to 10 members or 9 to 15 members. Ultimately, based on the last meeting, it sounded like the FTAC came to a consensus that not less than 9 voting members made the most sense. Obviously, we're below that right now, so we'll need to increase FTAC membership to get back up to the minimum of 9 members. But it sounded like that was kind of the consensus that this group came to when we discussed this at the last meeting. Another bit of conversation was what interest groups should be considered. Actually, before I mention that here, there was thought that 5 years was too long a term. The FTAC seemed to reach consensus that 3 years made much more sense. So the proposed change is for 3-year terms rather than 5. Members can be reelected after 3 years. There's no term limits or anything like that. It just seemed like 5 years was too long a term, so that change was made. As I was mentioning, the interest groups that should be considered as part of FTAC members, I know Barb mentioned that real estate and economic development was really important and often a voice that we don't hear both in this committee and in terms of freight movement as a whole. So based on Barb's comment, this bullet was added to consider real estate and economic development officials as part of the FTAC. There was also talk of having non-voting advisory roles. So, for example, Ivan Rucker from FHWA sits in on these meetings. Carl Jackson from Portsmouth, which is a locality that hosts port-related facilities, sit in. They would have non-voting advisory roles, which would definitely be helpful for getting their perspectives in terms of freight movement in our region. One other big thing that came out of this was the discussion in terms of whether the committee can be composed of strictly individuals or individuals that represent either companies or organizations. So, for example, should the member of the FTAC be David White, or should it be David White of the Virginia Maritime Association? If you do the latter, then it opens up for possibilities of alternatives. So if David White couldn't attend, then somebody else from the Virginia Maritime Association could represent Virginia Maritime Association in his place and be a voting member for that meeting. As it's set up right now, it's only individuals. So if David White misses the meeting, there is nobody to take his place as an alternate. So this was another discussion we had at September and December meetings, and it sounded like the committee came to a consensus that having individuals that represent companies or organizations seemed to make the most sense to help with the number of members that attend meetings and things like that. That was primarily what I had for Article 4 in terms of the important discussions and changes that we made to that. The remaining 4.2, 4.3, and 4.4, we still want FTAC members to have integrity and commitment to serving the community. We weren't changing that. Talking about excused absences, just slight updates based on not having individuals, but individuals that serve as part of their companies or organizations. So slight changes to the text would need to be made to represent that. Moving on to Article 5, Officers and Duties. We currently have a chair, or sorry, we currently have co-chairs as this committee. One of them is an elected official who is not an elected official anymore. So obviously, even though we have co-chairs, we really have one chair. And so there was talk with this committee if it made more sense to, instead of having co-chairs, to have a chair and a vice chair. That is very similar to the other committees and subcommittees we have here at HRTPO. And it sounded like that the FTAC members were receptive to following the other committees and having that chair and vice chair organization for this committee. We talked about the length of the how long people should hold the chair or co-chair. Right now it's 3 years. The FTAC thought that was probably a little too long, and maybe 2 years made more sense. That would also help match some of our other committees and subcommittees. They generally have terms of 2 years, so it would just match that. Moving down, once again, a lot of the updates that we looked at here are more related to, instead of having co-chairs, having a chair and vice chair. So some of the text would need to be updated. I don't think there was a lot of additional thoughts on any of these that needed to be reflected other than that. The one other item that really got a conversation on this was whether we should continue to try to have a chair as a voting member of the FTAC. And the pros and cons of that, the biggest con is that generally it's tough to get that person to show up at these meetings, as we've seen here in recent years. So if you make somebody that chair and they don't show up at any meetings, then it's tough to accomplish anything with that. So the committee discussed it and thought that it was most important to have a chair that was involved with the freight committee and shows up to meetings. And so as part of that, the thought of having it be required to be a voting member of the TPO board didn't make much sense. However, the chair of this committee is a non-voting member of the HRTPO board. So whoever the chair of this committee is invited to attend HRTPO board meetings and speak to freight as a non-voting member of that committee. Once again, most of the changes here are just to reflect, instead of having co-chairs, we would have a chair and vice chair. Nothing otherwise changed much on that. The big other thing we had here in terms of a change or a discussion we need to have reflects what constitutes quorum for this committee. Let me move down to that point. Once again, these were all small changes that didn't bring up much discussion at our last two meetings, so I don't want to spend too much time on that unless we want to have a discussion at the end. The bigger issue was this thought of quorum. Right now, quorum is 2/3 of voting membership, but obviously, if you have attendance problems, it's difficult to get quorum as part of that. So we had this discussion at September meeting about the difficulty of making 2/3 standard for quorum. But there was also discussion at the December meeting about, well, we also don't want a very small number of FTAC members to be able to constitute an official action. So, you know, if you take a small number of people but make that a quorum, and then only a small number of people have to approve it, then it could be a really small number of members that make FTAC policy or can approve FTAC policy moving forward. So the discussion, it sounded like there was some favor at the December 2019 meeting looking at requiring only a majority of members be in attendance for quorum. But once you have that quorum, then 2/3 votes for those in attendance would be needed to pass an item with the FTAC. So I definitely want to discuss that more as we get to the end of this here. But it sounded like people were pretty happy with that. You know, it makes it easier to have quorum, but it still requires a not insignificant number of members to be present to make official actions of the FTAC. It was highlighted right at the end to remember that this is an advisory committee. The HRTPO board is the policy setting board, so this committee is advising the FTAC. So just keep that in mind as we try to determine what makes sense to do quorum. But like I said, we'll talk about this more, but it sounded like the FTAC thought that this was a good idea in terms of having a majority for quorum and then 2/3 to pass any votes once you have that. I think that was the last big deal I wanted to talk about. Most of the other changes we have here are based on making it consistent with our other subcommittees in terms of public participation, things like that. Just making changes to make sure we're consistent with the TTAC and the Citizens Advisory Committee, which are the two other committees of the HRTPO board. So same thing with any amendments and all that. These were added just to make sure it's consistent with our other TPO board committees. So with that, I know that's a lot to throw out there. David, I guess I'll turn it back to you since you had a couple comments if you want to open up discussion on this.
Yeah, why don't we do it this way, just for the, to have some order for how we discuss this. Why don't we just start at the top and go section by section to see if anybody has anything.
Okay.
So yeah, if you could take us to the top of the document.
Yeah, we should be there.
I scrolled too far.
Yeah, page one should be on the
Articles
screen.
of the organization. Anybody have anything in the articles of the organization? Article 1, Article 2, Article 3. This is the first place I have a comment.
Okay.
So my only thing here is the proposed section 3.2, FTAC shall provide technical advice. I guess I'm a little stuck on the word technical. The FTAC is comprised primarily of industry experts, but may not necessarily be technical experts in the transportation. So I would only suggest perhaps removing the word technical in that first, in the two places where it shows up in that sentence.
Yeah, sounds good to me. So it would be the FTAC shall provide advice and support to HRTPO staff and shall provide review and assistance in regional freight transportation planning. Is that correct, Dave?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. That sounds good to me.
Okay. Anybody have anything else to section 3? Okay, section 4.
And this is where we talked about who we recommend as possible members in terms of number of members and term length.
All right, so I know that I have something here. So with regards to term, I have one suggestion, and that would be to perhaps add some language here that says something of the nature, the term of a member serving as an officer may be extended for as long as they may remain an officer, so that we don't get ourselves in a situation where perhaps somebody is either serving as the chair or the vice chair. They've been asked or voted to serve a 2-year term as a chair or vice chair, but it doesn't coordinate or match up with their 3-year term as a member.
Sure. And it should be noted here that these terms can be renewed after every 3 years. So there is no term limit, for example, but I agree that we would want to make sure that, as you said, if there's an official in a 2-year term, but his 3-year term runs out in the middle of that it would be extended. So I'll work on that language, David, and I'll share it with you just to confirm that that's the thought you had in terms of how you wanted it spelled out in there.
Yeah, and again, what I just noted and play with it, the term of a member serving as an officer may be extended for as long as they may remain an officer.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good to me, David. This meeting is being recorded, so I can go through and listen to the recording and get that language and put it in there.
Okay. Anybody have anything more on section 4? Section 5. Any comments? None. Section 6. Okay, I have something. Did I hear somebody?
Hey, David, how you doing? Keith, how you doing? Ivan, Federal Highway.
Yes.
I know Barbara discussed, I know we're in the early stages of establishing a statewide freight advisory committee. You think it might be, I guess, significant or important to give some thought to, with respect to the chair and co-chair, perhaps, depending on the structure of the statewide freight advisory committee, them serving as a conduit between this board or this body and the statewide freight advisory committee representing the interests of its members in the region. I don't know if that's something you to include in here or whether or not you'd be overstepping the bounds of policy committee, but just a thought to throw out there to think about.
Do you want
Or
to
do you think it's premature to include anything like that? And these amendments?
I would ask Barb what her thoughts are on that, I guess, too, since she's the one more familiar with the statewide advisory committee and what her thoughts are on that. I'm not sure Barb can hear us. Oh. Can you hear us, Barb?
My sound is, I'm having trouble with my sound. I've tried moving places in my house. And so I couldn't hear the question very well.
Can you hear me now? Verizon, can you hear me now?
Hey, Barb, Ivan, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hey, no, the question was, you and I are working very closely with the secretary with respect to establishing a statewide freight advisory committee. And so the question that I asked, since we're on the topic of chairs and co-chairs, was maybe perhaps to give some thought, again, depending on how the statewide freight advisory committee is structured, to perhaps the chair or the co-chair serving as a conduit between this particular board and the statewide advisory committee, representing the interests of the board or the interests of the stakeholders of the region. Whether or not that should be the responsibility of either the chair or the co-chair, or will we be, as advisory committee, overstepping our bounds of the policy committee in terms of representing the interests of freight stakeholders for the Hampton Roads region.
Okay, thanks for the accommodation and restating the question. I hope y'all can hear me because now I can hear you better. So here's what I would recommend. That's item, but I think here's what I would recommend. We are looking at having, as part of the technical resource team, have representation from MPOs across Virginia, and I think that would be an opportunity for where we can plug in not only the voice of the VAMPO, the Virginia Association of MPOs, or individual MPOs, but if there's a standing freight committee that they could also plug in at that place. That would be my off the top of my head thought, but I'd be glad to give it some additional thought.
Yeah.
So Barbara, you're saying that it should be something established by the state level freight committee, that they would have that they would designate within their policy documents or structural documents a connection to a regional freight body. Whether it's one way or another, I think Ivan makes an important point that there should be a linkage between the FTAC, the regional FTAC, and the state freight advisory committee.
And
I think in Virginia, I don't think there's any other region that is quite unique as the Hampton Roads region, which it's with its major military installations as well as its port facilities. So that's kind of sort of why I kind of sort of draw the distinction between a Hampton Roads representative from the FTAC, Hampton Roads FTAC, as a conduit between the region and the state. So I just threw that out there.
And yeah, it might be best served as TPO staff. If I'm on that technical committee that Barb was mentioning, maybe it makes the most sense to be the conduit to FTAC that way.
Gotcha.
I guess I'll leave it at that unless Barb has any more insight about the technical committee. But
I don't, but we have a coordination call this Friday morning, and so I'll be glad to raise it during that call and then report back. Keith, I'll follow up with you and Ivan.
Great, sounds great, Barb.
So let's leave that as a matter for follow-up, but not delay the actions that we need to go ahead with in terms of updating the bylaws.
Sounds good.
Okay, so section 6.8, proposed 6.8. I disagree with that final sentence in the first paragraph. No meeting during which FTAC or TPO business is discussed shall be held, what does it say? Shall be conducted through telephonic or electronic means where the members are not physically assembled. I mean, that's that just doesn't make sense in today's world.
And right,
and in the future.
Yeah, it made sense 9 months ago, obviously. And this matches, unfortunately, we haven't updated TTAC bylaws or anything like that to account for this. So you're correct. I will reword this sentence. Definitely need to have
in fact,
discussion.
I would suggest that we specifically include language that states that the FTAC can meet via electronic means, provided that there's the necessary public access.
Yeah, the issue is in moving forward. The reason we're able to meet electronically like this is because of the declared state of emergency that the governor made in the state of Virginia. Once that state of emergency is removed, then we will no longer be allowed to meet via electronic means unless there's legislation changes to account for that. And obviously that very well may happen. Who knows at this point, but I think basically maybe the sense needs to be in here with a caveat that, unless, state of emergencies or something, supersede it or something like that. But yeah, as I said, once the state of emergency is over, then this goes back to applying where you can't meet via electronic means.
Well, my sense of it, and I open it up for discussion, is that the world is not going to look exactly the same after the pandemic when the pandemic is over as it did pre-pandemic. Right. And I think we should be a little bit more forward-looking and just recognizing that we have all learned that public business can be conducted effectively by electronic means. And so I think that I'm not suggesting that any of us is going to want to hold every meeting electronically, but and this could get to our participation as well, that by allowing for some accommodation for electronic participation, that it would be wise to do so.
And maybe the smart thing to do is just somehow reference the TPO board. If they're allowed to meet electronically, then we can. If they can't, then we can't. And obviously, I would say that much more eloquently than that. But it's the same thing as the TPO board or any of these public meetings. they have to be held in person unless the state of emergency supersedes it, where we can meet electronically. So maybe just being consistent with the TPO board bylaws on that, since really when they can meet in person or when they can meet electronically, we can, and when they can't, we can't.
Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, let me talk to my bosses about this one a little bit further, and see if we can come up with something that makes sense on this. But like you said, the biggest issue moving forward is we have no idea what it'll look like post-COVID, whether there'll be any legislation changes allowing for it or anything like that. So it's really unknown at this point.
Yeah, Keith, if I can jump in, we'll definitely discuss after the meeting on how best we can address what you brought up, but also being cognizant of what we are allowed to do. So we'll definitely loop back and get back to you on that.
Anything else on section 8, Article 6?
And I would like to revisit 6.7 here in terms of the quorum to see if there's any thoughts one way or another, if everybody's happy with this, majority for quorum, but 2/3 required for votes in attendance to pass motions. If everybody's still on board with that, or if there's people who have different thoughts on that.
And based on my recollection, you captured kind of what we all came to. What I believe we kind of came to consensus to at the last meeting.
Yeah, I left a big note on the notes I took we needed to have further discussion. So I definitely wanted to give the opportunity to let me know if this was correctly captured based on our last discussion or what the thoughts were. But.
Okay. Article 7, any comments? Article 8. Okay, are you looking for a motion of any sort?
Not until our next meeting. The plan was to take any comments and changes from today, incorporate into the bylaws, and then I would email the updated bylaws out, let's say in the next couple weeks, well in advance of when our next meeting would be, just in case there's any final changes that would like to be made. And then at our next meeting, we would vote for approval on the updated bylaws.
All right. Thank you, Keith. Bylaws are never easy, never fun. So thank you for your work on this.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Final agenda item. And so I know that we all are probably ready we have other business to go to. So any topics that really stand out in terms of items we'd really like to cover at the next or perhaps subsequent meetings?
Yeah, just going over this list I have on here, I just wanted to mention, as Dale mentioned, the 2045 LRTP is expected to be approved sometime in the summer timeframe. So once that is approved, we'll come back in front of this board and share the final product with the FTAC. Couple of studies, the Regional Connector Study and Route 58 Corridor Study. Regional Connector Study, I believe most of this group got a presentation from Mike Kimbrell 2 years ago on that study. It continues to be ongoing. We just want to give a status update to this group at a future meeting on the status of that study. Route 58 was recently completed. We just want to do a quick presentation on some of the results of that study. In terms of legislative agendas, this group asked to be involved early in the process in terms of possible legislative agendas for the HRTPO. So we generally put those together in the fall timeframe. So around summertime, we'll probably come back to this group and ask if there are any thoughts that you would like incorporated into the HRTPO's legislative agenda. And then just to finish with E, especially with new members, there's not a lot of familiarity with how the HRTPO funds projects and selects projects. So we wanted to bring John Mahaly in front of this group who handles some of the funding and programming for the HRTPO, just to describe how projects get funded, how they get selected, things like that, just to give that background to this group. So we'll probably do that at the next meeting, like I said, especially for the new members, to give them background on how that happens. And then obviously based on Sam's presentation, once we have an updated map to share with this group, we'll do that at a future meeting. And then, like I said, if there's any ideas for future topics that anybody in this group would like us to add, we're definitely we'd definitely like to hear them.
All right, well, those all sound, those all seem to have merit to me. All right, old new business.
David, can I go back to the previous one for just a minute? And maybe you guys could fill me in on whether this would be inside the committee's lane or not. But as far as freight movement goes, would truck tolling and express lane planning for trucks be within our ambit?
I think you just made Barb's day.
I did? Well, good for me.
Yeah, definitely. Barb would love for this group to discuss trucks and express lanes and tolling at a future meeting.
Yeah, the free flow of freight as a meaningful component of any overall freight movement plan for the area, I think is important. And separately from that, safety around trucks might be another significant issue. I believe there's actually a law in Georgia, and there are some very large signs on the interstates requiring automobiles to not pull into the lane in front of a truck without allowing a significant distance. And as you know, many times an auto truck accident is the result of an auto pulling in within the braking zone of the truck. And I see you shaking your head, so you're familiar with that scenario. That might be something that might be interesting for us to look at, trying to bubble up in the context of keeping freight and passenger cars moving safely through the transportation system.
Sounds good. I've gone ahead and added it to the future topic list.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Those are both good topics. Old new business, agenda item number 11. I'll just comment here that I'm sure that everybody who pays attention to what's happening in DC is aware that there's discussion of an infrastructure package. And so, perhaps there is an opportunity to move some of these things along a little faster. And in fact, that's there's already some discussion that's happening at the regional level around that. Have been involved in some discussions that have included the Port Authority, the TPO, and others already, with the idea of, if there is going to be a significant infrastructure package, how can we get in front of it and best position this region to benefit from it? So just want to let you know that those discussions are taking place, and we're not waiting to see what happens, but again, trying to get ahead of that. So if there's anything in, I'll go back to the list of projects that were in the 2045 long range plan. If there's anything that you think that is out there that is just a vitally important project that perhaps is not included, I would welcome hearing about that from you. And, just so you know, that 2045 long range plan, that's already the basis for a short list of projects that can be advocated for in an infrastructure package coming out of this Congress and administration. So I wanted to make you aware of that. again, extend the invitation that if there's a project that you think is significant, transformational, that is perhaps listed but should be emphasized more, or is perhaps not listed, please reach out and we can have that, and we can talk about that. Any other questions or comments around that?
I may add, Mr. Chair, so this Bob Crum, our director, is involved in these regional conversations in preparation for the infrastructure. So we have been looking at the list, we're looking at projects that were candidates, didn't make the draft list. So we have been looking at it, and I believe he's had conversations with other regional stakeholders on this. So definitely, if you said anything that we might have missed, let us know. The one other thing that I think is not related directly, but the infra grant, the notice of funding availability, the NOFA got released, I believe, last week. So it's a shorter timeline, so it's now due. It was released late, but we still have the same deadline of March 19th. So we've been looking at it to see if there are what projects could be submitted. And I think at the last HTAC, I believe, John Mahaley made an announcement, like if your locality is thinking of something, please let us know. But in our review of the criteria, I think there are a couple of new additional criteria that are different from the last grant cycle. The focus is a lot, I mean, freight is still a big focus, but they're looking at climate change, environmental justice, racial equity as important criteria. So I just wanted to bring it to your attention. We are talking internally on what would be the projects, again, looking at our draft list, looking at our candidates. So we are having those conversations as well. And if you have any suggestions or you're thinking of some projects, please keep us in the loop. That'd be really helpful. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that's a good point you made. Our understanding is as well. I mean, it's being talked about as an infrastructure package, but it is likely to be broader than what we typically think of in terms of highways and roads and that kind of thing. It'll probably broadband and possibly schools and that kind of thing. So it'll be very we're expecting to see something that'll be very broad in terms of the infrastructure.
Can I make a quick comment, David? I think last time around, when the Obama administration started, the key buzzword was shovel ready. And I'm not criticizing anybody, but Virginia took a fairly traditional, straightforward approach in how it defined shovel ready, while other states basically said stuff was shovel ready. And they got an disproportionate amount of funding because they said things were ready to go, that they took several years to get started. So I'm not advocating Virginia, completely go to the other side, but certainly advancing anything to what might be described as shovel ready, given there's a number of the same people are now back in those positions. I think making those decisions, we should expect that some standard like shovel ready will be applied, and Virginia needs to be very aggressive this time around to get every fair piece of the pie that it can get.
That's a great comment, and if I can share something that was expressed during a Federal Railroad Administration and AASHTO webinar last week. They specifically talked about the difference between, or the distinction for this administration may be not just shovel ready, but shovel worthy. And I thought that was interesting, that it's not, that they're looking for the best projects, even if it needs a little time to develop. But more to come on that clearly.
Yeah, and my sense is that's, perhaps where things could have been done better the last time around have been noted. And because of the shovel-ready requirements, that projects that were maybe could have been transformational were not undertaken. And so I think to Barbara's point, again, my sense is that they're going to be looking to advance projects that'll really be impactful. Okay. If there's nothing else, then agenda item number 12, next meeting.
All right,
have
I'll
a
go ahead
date?
and take this item, I guess, David. We're looking to get back to how we handled meetings back in 2018, 2019, where we could handle, hold our meetings every, say, 2 to 3 months and get back to a regular schedule like that, moving forward. And I haven't spoken too much with Barb on this, but I'm assuming she agrees pretty much with that thought process. So we definitely have a number of items that we can bring back to this committee, moving forward. So looking at the calendar, it looks like April 15th would be when the TPO board would approve Bob and Cannon being added to this committee. So I would recommend sometime soon thereafter is when we would aim to hold our next meeting. I'll probably send out a doodle poll as we get closer, so we can see what time works for everybody. But I would say sometime in that late April, maybe early May timeframe, once Cannon and Bob have been approved as members, would be a perfect time to have our next meeting.
All right, perfect. And then just prior to closing, a reminder, let's try to get, let's try to think about some additional people that would really add to the strength of the committee here. So bring your recommendations forward and let's get the committee back to full strength. All right, if there's nothing else, we stand adjourned, and I wish you all a good remainder of your day, and hope you'll enjoy some of the sunshine and warmer temperatures.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, David.